She's a mother, she's a queen, and she's living in the 12th century Ile-Ife in what we now call Nigeria. So this woman, her name is Moremi Ajasoro, and at the time this whole thing goes down, she's in the absolute prime of her life, likely in her late 20s or her early 30s, carrying the weight of an entire kingdom on her shoulders. And let me tell you, the weight was heavy. See, her people were being terrorized. Every market day, these forest people, the Igbos, would descend like ghosts. They were covered from head to toe in rustling raffia palm fronds. The people of Ife thought they were fighting demons. They thought they were being haunted by spirits they couldn't touch. Moremi wasn't buying it. She looked at her people's fear and decided she was going to be the one to stare into the dark. She went to the Esimiri River and made a vow that would make a statue tremble. Help me save my people, and I will give you whatever you demand. She walked into the next raid. She let herself be taken. She played the long game, marrying the enemy king, learning their secrets and discovering that these demons were just men in grass suits. Until she realized the only thing standing between her people and freedom was a single spark. Moremi escaped. She didn't just run. She flew back to Ile-Ife with the blueprint for victory. She told the warriors, "Get the torches ready." When the spirits returned, the men of Ife didn't hide. They struck their flints. They turned those raffia costumes into funeral pyres. The invaders were wiped out. The war was over. But then came the bill. She went back to the river to pay her debt, thinking the gods might want a few goats or some gold. But the river deity didn't want property. The river demanded her only son, Olurogbo. Most people would have turned back and run. Most people would have broken the deal. But Moremi was a woman of her word. She made the ultimate sacrifice so every other mother in Ife could keep their children safe. She lost her son to save a civilization. And that is why, nearly 1,000 years later, we still say her name. If you are in Moremi Ajasoro's situation, would you have given up your child? Let me know in the comments. So this woman is a princess in the 16th century, born into the fierce Red Earth kingdom of Zazzau. Her name is Amina, and by the time she hits her mid-30s, she isn't interested in the life everyone's laid out for her. Back then, a woman of her status was expected to be a pawn. You marry a prince, you secure a border, you sit still and look pretty. But this woman, she didn't want a husband, she wanted a horse. She didn't want a dowry, she wanted a dagger. While other girls were learning to manage a household, Amina was out in the dirt, training with the royal guard. She was learning the rhythm of the blade and the psychology of the charge. She became so lethal, so tactically brilliant, that when her brother the king died, the military didn't look for a man. They looked at her. She took the throne and immediately did something that shook the continent. She commanded an army of 20,000 battle-hardened soldiers. She spent the next 34 years in the saddle, expanding her empire until the entire region knew that if you saw her banners on the horizon, it was already too late. She built the walls of Amina around every city. She took monuments of stone that said, "I own this." She was the undisputed alpha in the world of wolves. Until she realized that the true price of being a legend is that you have to be willing to stand completely alone. Amina never married. Not because she couldn't, but because she refused to give any man the power to tell her no. The legend says she would take a lover from the enemy camp after a victory, only to execute him the next morning so he could never brag about being with the queen. That was some cold-blooded, high-stakes commitment to your own autonomy. She introduced the kola nut to the trade routes. She turned her kingdom into the heartbeat of Saharan commerce. She didn't just lead an army, she built an era. She died in the field, likely in her 60s, still wearing her armor, refusing to bow to anything but the soil she conquered. She proved that a crown isn't something you inherit, it's something you take and defend with 20,000 spears. Listen, you've got to understand the scale of what we're talking about here. This isn't just a boundary. This is a human ambition written in the very dirt of the earth. So this civilization, they are the Edo people of the Benin Empire, located in what we now call southern Nigeria. And around the 13th to 15th centuries, they decide they aren't just going to live in the rainforest, they are going to master it. The king, the Oba, looks out at his capital and realizes that to protect the most sophisticated bronze workers and ivory carvers the world has ever seen, he needs more than just soldiers. He needs a miracle of engineering. They start digging and they don't stop. They create a network of walls and moats that stretches for 16,000 kilometers. Think about that. That's 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. They moved more earth than the Egyptians did for the pyramids. It was a massive mathematical grid of protection that turned the city into a fortress and a masterpiece at the same time. For centuries, this was the standard of the world. European explorers would show up, see the wide streets, the streetlights fueled by palm oil, and these towering walls, and they lose their breath. They couldn't believe a jungle city could be more organized than Amsterdam. Benin was the center of the universe. Until the world's greed finally caught up to its beauty. In 1897, a British punitive expedition decided that the bronze and the ivory were worth more than the people who made them. They didn't just come for trade, they came for the soul of the empire. They breached those unbreakable walls. They burnt the city to the waterline. They looted the Benin bronzes, thousands of pieces of priceless history, and shipped them off to the museums in London and Berlin. They tried to bury the story. They tried to make us forget that the rainforest civilization outbuilt the rest of the planet. But you can't bury 16,000 kilometers of evidence. Those walls are still there, whispering under the roots of the trees, reminding us of what happens when a people decides to build something that even time can't fully erase. It's a story of genius, it's a story of theft, and it's a story of a legacy that refuses to stay in the shadows. So, imagine you're a miner in Nigeria in 1928. You are just looking for some tin, minding your own business, when suddenly you dig up a head. But it's not a human head. It's made of clay. It's got those weird triangular eyes and a hairstyle that looks more like a high-fashion runway look than something from the Stone Age. Now, the miners, they didn't think much of it. They actually thought it was a toy or just some junk. They kept digging, finding more pieces, and for 15 years, these incredible artifacts were literally being used as scarecrows or doorstops. Everyone just assumed Africa didn't have advanced ancient art. Until in 1943, an archaeologist named Bernard Fagg is visiting a local farm and he sees a terracotta head sitting on top of a pole to scare away birds. He's like, wait a minute, where did you get that? He tracks it back to the Jaba people in Kaduna, and what he finds next sends a shockwave through the entire scientific world. This wasn't just a random artist. This was the knock culture. And here's the shocking part. Carbon dating proved that these people were smelting iron and creating world-class art as far back as 1500 BC. That's over 3,000 years ago. While half of the world was still figuring out basic tools, the Nok were building a massive, organized civilization with a level of details in their sculptures that won't be seen again for centuries. But here's the truly intriguing part about the Nok. Every single time we find a piece of their history, it completely destroys the narrative that sub-Saharan Africa was behind the rest of the world. The pattern is always the same. We find a Nok statue, it's incredibly complex, and then we realize they vanished without a trace around 500 AD. No one knows why they disappeared or where they went, but their influence, it's everywhere. You can see the DNA of Nok art in the later bronze heads of Ife and the Benin Empire. It's a recurring theme of the lost genius civilization that literally laid the groundwork for African royalty. And we almost missed it because some guys were using their history as a scarecrow. So the next time someone tells you African history started a few hundred years ago, tell them about the Nok. They were the original masters of the craft. But what do you guys think? Is there still a massive Nok city hidden under the soil of Kaduna? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you in the next one. So, everyone talks about the Great Wall of China like it's the only massive flex in history. But what if I told you there's a 160-kilometer defensive system buried in the Nigerian jungle that makes most medieval castles look like Lego sets? This is the story of Sumbo Zeredo. It isn't just a wall, it's a massive network of ditches and embankments that's over 1,000 years old. We are talking about a project that required moving more earth than the Great Pyramids of Giza. And the craziest part is, it was allegedly built by a woman who was so rich and so powerful that people think she might actually be the biblical Queen of Sheba. Let's look at the numbers because they are absolutely insane. This wall system circles an area of 40 miles wide. The ditches are 70 feet deep in some places. That's like a 7-story building on the ground. And remember, they didn't have any bulldozers or excavators. They had iron tools and pure unadulterated power. The Ijebu people built this as a massive do not disturb sign for their kingdom, creating a vertical wall of mud that was impossible for invaders to climb while they rained arrows down from the top. It was the ultimate security system. According to the local legend, this wasn't built by a king. It was commissioned by Bilikisu Sungbo. She was a wealthy, childless widow who wanted to build a monument that would make sure nobody ever forgot her name. She was so influential that even today, her grave is a holy site. But for centuries, the rest of the world had no idea this place even existed. Until in 1994, when a British archaeologist named Patrick Darling stumbled into the rainforest and realized that the hills he was walking on weren't natural. They were man-made. He started measuring and realized he was standing on the largest single pre-colonial monument in Africa. Suddenly, the Western world had to grapple with the fact that while they were in the Dark Ages, the Ijebu Kingdom was running one of the most sophisticated engineering projects on the planet. But here is where it gets truly unhinged. Local Muslims and Christians in the area are convinced that Bilikisu Sungbo is actually the Queen of Sheba from the Bible and the Quran. They point to the fact that her name, Bilikisu, is the same as Bilqis, the name used for the Queen of Sheba in Islamic tradition. If that's true, this isn't just a wall. It's a lost kingdom that King Solomon was obsessed with. Archaeologists are still arguing about it, but the scale of the Eredo suggests a level of wealth that matches the legend. But here's the kicker. Despite being one of the greatest engineering feats in human history, Songbo's Eredo is currently being swallowed by the jungle and urban sprawl. This isn't just a UNESCO World Heritage Site yet, which means this 1,000-year-old masterpiece is literally disappearing because people are building houses right on top of it. It's like finding out you have a Ferrari in your backyard and using it as a chicken coop. So, is it the Queen of Sheba's lost palace, or just the most aggressive get-off-my-lawn move in history? Either way, it is a 160-kilometer reminder that African history is way deeper than what they taught you in school. What will you build to make sure people remember you in 1,000 years? Let me know in the comments. So this man, he's the prince of the highest pedigree, a warrior whose name carries the weight of thunder and the son of the legendary Oduduwa himself. His name is Oramiyan, and around the 12th century, he's standing in the sacred city of Ile-Ife in what we now call Nigeria, looking east towards the kingdom in a total freefall. You see, the people of Benin, the Edo, had just fired their old gods. They had ousted the Ogiso dynasty, the kings of the sky, after centuries of mismanagement, and the power vacuum was swallowing the city. They tried to run the place like a republic. They tried local committees, but it was a disaster. The streets were hot with tension and the chiefs were at each other's throats. The elders of Benin realized they needed a stabilizer, a man with the divine DNA of Ife to reset the clock. They sent an SOS to Ife, and after Oramiyan's father tested their patience by making them raise 7 lice in the hair of their children for 3 years, he decided that these people were ready for a prince. Oramiyan rode into Benin with the swagger of a conqueror and the mind of a statesman, marrying the beautiful princess Erimide and spending years trying to navigate the shark-infested waters of Edo politics, trying to teach a 1,000-year-old culture how to dance to a new Ife rhythm, trying to be the savior they asked for. Until he realized that you can never truly rule a house where the walls don't speak your language. Oramiyan looked at the friction, the vexation of the local lords who wanted a king but hated being told what to do. He realized that for Benin to truly thrive, it shouldn't be a satellite of Ife. It has to be its own beast. He called the place Ile-Ibinu, the land of anger, and he made the most boss move in the history of diplomacy. He decided to leave, but he didn't leave them empty-handed. He left his son Iwe Kawan, born of that Benin princess, to be raised by the local culture but fueled by the Ife bloodline. Oramiyan walked away from the throne to go found the Oyo Empire, becoming the first Alaafin and creating a geopolitical superpower that would dominate the West African landscape for centuries. He understood that a true leader doesn't stay where he isn't understood. He plants a seed, builds a bridge, and moves on to the next horizon. By stepping down, he didn't lose a kingdom. He gained a legacy that linked the Yoruba and Edo dynasties in a golden chain that has never been broken, even to this very day. It's the ultimate story of strategic retreat turning into a double empire victory, proving that sometimes the best way to lead is to give the people a king who looks like them, even if he carries your heart. So this man, he's a prince of the blood, the rightful heir to the throne of Benin, but he's living like a ghost in the shadows of the 15th century. His name is Ogun, and at this moment, likely in his late 20s or early 30s, he's a man with no home, no crown, and the target on his back larger than the empire itself. You see, the political machinery in the capital had turned into a meat grinder. His younger brother had usurped the throne, and Ogun was cast out into the deep, unforgiving wild of the African rainforest. Most men would have laid down and let the jungle reclaim them, but Ogun was cut from a different cloth. For years, he lived in the raw heart of the bush, trading his silk robes for hunter skin and his palace comforts for the cold reality of survival. He didn't just hide, he studied. He spent every waking hour learning the medicine of the earth, mastering the secret properties of plants, the language of the animals, and the brutal silent tactics of forest warfare. He was becoming a philosopher of the blade and a scientist of the woods, building a mental and physical arsenal that no city-bred soldier could ever comprehend. He was out there in the rain and the dirt, transforming himself from a broken exile into a living weapon, waiting for the exact moment to strike back and take what was rightfully his. Until he realized that the king who has conquered the forest is a king that no man-made wall can ever keep out. Ogun didn't just return to Benin. He descended upon it like a physical manifestation of the jungle's wrath. He used his medicine, his superior knowledge of psychology, stealth, and chemistry to outmaneuver every guard and every traitor who stood in his place. He didn't just reclaim the throne. He completely dismantled the old corrupt system and rebuilt it from the dirt up. He took a new name, Oba Ewere the Great, meaning trouble has ceased, and he went on to turn Benin into a sprawling golden superpower. He was the one who started the Great Wars, the one who invited the artists to cast the world-famous bronzes, and the one who expanded the borders until the name of Benin was whispered with awe from the coast to the savannah. He proved that the time you spend in your forests, the time you spend in exile, in the struggle, in the dark, isn't a waste of life. It is the training ground for your greatest victory. He went into the woods as a hunted prince and walked out as the greatest emperor West Africa has ever seen. A man who understood that you have to know the soil before you can rule the people.
So, you probably think that the ancient maritime engineering belongs to the Vikings, the Egyptians, or the Phoenicians, right? Wrong. In fact, there's an incredible recurring pattern in history where we assume the ancient world was primitive and disconnected, only for one accidental discovery to prove that humans were pulling off mind-blowing engineering feats thousands of years before we thought possible. And the craziest part of this pattern is that the older the discovery, the more it shatters our entire timeline of human progress. Take 1987 in Yobe State, Nigeria. A Fulani herdsman is just trying to dig a water well for his cattle. He's digging deep into the thick, heavy clay, completely oblivious to the fact that he started on top of the world record. Until his shovel strikes something hard. He thinks it's just a stubborn tree root, but as he clears the mud, he realizes it's a massive, perfectly carved piece of wood. He calls the experts, and when archaeologists finally excavate the site, they are staring at an incredibly well-preserved 28-foot dugout canoe made entirely from black African mahogany. Now, everyone figured, okay, it's a neat old fishing boat from a few centuries ago. But they sent samples for radiocarbon dating, and the results absolutely rocked the global scientific community. This boat wasn't hundreds of years old, it was 8,000 years old. Let that sink in. This makes the Dufuna canoe the oldest boat ever discovered in Africa, and the third oldest boat on the entire planet. And here's where the pattern gets truly wild. 8,000 years ago, humans in Europe were barely figuring out how to plant basic crops. They hadn't even started building proper houses yet. Meanwhile, in ancient Nigeria, people had already mastered complex woodworking, advanced physics, and maritime engineering to navigate the ancient mega lake Chad. We keep falling into the pattern of underestimating ancient African technology. But this single boat proves that they were ruling the waterways while the rest of the world was still playing catch-up. It just goes to show, history is always being rewritten by what's hidden right beneath our feet. But what do you guys think? Do you think there are even older ships buried under the sands of the Sahara?
So, we've all heard the phrase, behind every great man is a great woman, right? It's a pattern we see all over history. The king gets all the glory, his name goes on the monuments, and the woman who actually did the heavy lifting are left as a tiny footnote in a dusty notebook.
Today, we call powerful kids who inherit everything Nepo babies. And back in the 16th century, being a young king meant you had a massive target on your back. People assumed you were soft, that you couldn't handle the pressure, and that your empire was ripe for the picking. This was the exact pattern playing out for Oba Eseye, the young ruler of the mighty Benin Empire. His neighbors, the fierce Igala kingdom of Ida, looked at him and thought, this kid is weak. Let's march in, take his throne, and erase Benin from the map. They brought a massive, terrifying army right to his borders, and every single advisor in the palace was panicking. The historical pattern said the young king was going to freeze, his empire was going to crumble, and his legacy would be over before it even started. Until the real power in the palace stepped out of the shadows. Queen Idia, the king's mother, looked at the invading army, looked at the terrified generals, and decided she wasn't about to let anyone touch her son's throne. Now, the traditional pattern for royal mothers back then was simple. Sit in the back, look elegant, and pray for the men to come back from the war. But Idia completely trashed the script. She didn't just give her son a pep talk. She ordered the empire's best blacksmiths to forge her a custom suit of armor. She used her massive political influence to raise an entirely separate elite army loyal to only her, and she marched directly to the absolute front lines of the war. And this is the shocking revelation that caught the entire region off guard. Queen Idia wasn't just there for a photo op. She was a master of what ancient historians call medicinal warfare. This woman had an elite knowledge of pharmacology, occult strategies, and psychological warfare. While the Ida kingdom thought they were fighting a standard, predictable army, Idia was busy completely rewriting the rules of engagement. She used brilliant, unconventional military tactics to lure the invaders into deadly bottlenecks. She supplied her frontline troops with specialized herbal stimulants that kept them awake and fighting with superhuman endurance. The Igala forces, completely blinded by their own ignorance, found themselves walking into a meat grinder orchestrated by a mother protecting her son's birthright. It wasn't just a victory, it was an absolute crushing rout. But here's how that pattern of hidden women was permanently broken. Oba Eseye knew exactly who saved his life and his kingdom. He didn't take the credit. Instead, he shattered Benin tradition and created an entirely new supreme political title just for her, Iyoba, the Queen Mother. She was given her own palace, her own independent army, and the power to veto royal decisions. Her face became the ultimate symbol of an empire survival. In fact, her son commissioned the world-famous 16th century ivory pendant mask to honor her genius, a masterpiece so legendary it became the global face of African civilization during Festac 77. So the next time someone tells you that ancient history was strictly a man's game, tell them they needed to meet the Iyoba of Benin. She didn't just stand behind the throne, she built an armor that protected it. Okay, quick question. If you wanted to find a stash of buried treasure worth billions of dollars, where would you look? A private island? An Egyptian pyramid? Well, what if I told you that one of the most insane, mind-blowing treasures in human history was found completely by accident in a regular backyard? See, history has this really annoying pattern. When people talk about super rich kings from over 1,000 years ago, they always talk about European castles or emperors in China. We are totally brainwashed to think that if an ancient culture didn't build giant stone palaces, they must have been poor or just living some super simple life in the forest. For centuries, historians looked at places like Anambra, Nigeria and thought, yeah, nothing major was happening there back then. They assumed West Africa was totally cut off from the rest of the world. The pattern said this place was just a quiet, empty forest. Until 1938. There's this regular guy named Isaiah Anozie. He's hanging out in his backyard in a town called Ibuku, just trying to dig a giant hole to collect rainwater. He's sweaty, he's tired, he's hitting regular dirt, and then his shovel hits something hard. He thinks it's just an annoying rock, but he keeps digging, clears away the mud and realized he didn't find a rock. He just accidentally opened a secret door to a forgotten empire. He has stumbled straight into an untouched 1,100-year-old royal tomb. And the guy buried inside, he wasn't even lying down. He was sitting completely upright on a beautiful, custom-carved wooden stool, dressed up in the most glittering, high-fashion royal clothes you can imagine. He was an ancient spiritual leader, like a billionaire king from the 9th century. And the stuff they buried him with literally broke the brains of scientists all over the world. Get ready for this. Archaeologists showed up and started counting the shiny things in the dirt. They counted 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. No, they kept counting until they hit over 100,000 beautiful glass and colorful beads. 100,000. Now, I know what you're thinking. Vantage, they're just beads. I have beads in my art class. Trust me, these weren't plastic beads from a craft store. In the 9th century, these specific beads were the ancient equivalent of a shiny new iPhone, a Rolex watch, and $1 million diamond ring all rolled into one. They were super high-tech luxury items. And here's the crazy part. They weren't even made in Nigeria. They were imported from places thousands of miles away, like Egypt, India, and the Meridian. Think about how wild that is. Over 1,000 years ago, while kings in Europe were living in cold, muddy wooden huts with no electricity or plumbing, this Nigerian king was sitting in a backyard in Anambra, literally dripping in global wealth. Ibuku wasn't isolated. It was the ultimate VIP shopping mall of the ancient world. But the story gets even crazier because of the toys they buried it in. The tomb was packed with bronze artworks like this famous metal pot that looks like it's wrapped in real delicate rope, and these tiny, high-detailed face masks. The metalwork was so perfect, so microscopic, that when European scholars first saw it, they actually got mad. They tried to claim that black people couldn't have made it, and that some random foreigners must have dropped it there. Why? Because they couldn't accept that the 9th century Nigerians were better at engineering and science than people in Europe at the exact same time. But guess what? Science doesn't just care about excuses. Experts ran chemical tests on the metal, and the results came back 100% local. The ground, the metal, the genius, it all belongs right there to the ancestors of the Igbo people. It completely rewrote history books. So, the next time someone tries to tell you that ancient Africa was left behind or just didn't have cool technology, just tell them to look at the backyard in Igbo. Those 100,000 beads prove they weren't just playing the game, they owned the whole board. But what do you guys think? Will you have shared the treasure or keep all 100,000 beads to yourself?